um, knowledge, she was primarily focused on India and those paths and Tibet. And so she used the swastika as a symbol of the gods, as a symbol of enlightenment. She was very into astrotheology, so the swastika has a legitimate connotation there. Well, of course, then later on, people like Guido von List and other people after she died who called themselves theosophists used those symbols on their political documents, something I don't believe she ever would have endorsed. But people don't need to believe me on that. They, should go and read it for themselves and find out. So yeah, certain symbols, certain aspects of her ideology were lifted, reframed, recooked in a different sauce, and then of course she gets the blame. But as a matter of fact, Alice Bailey, Alice Bailey's husband, and their circle, which was very much a British circle. We have to remember that Blavatsky herself was Russian. She had absolutely no connection whatsoever to any of these Masonic, Illuminati, Rosicrucian, or royal figures. In fact, she warned about them all through her life. And again, if you haven't read her works, then you wouldn't know this, and you'd believe all of this hearsay. Now, having said that, you see, I'm not supremely. First of all, I'm not an authority on Madame Blavatsky. I like her for very specific reasons, which are pretty much independent of a lot of the other ways that she's known. I don't agree with a lot of her work at all. In fact, a lot of my work is to try and, update and renovate many topics. For instance, the concept of the Aryans or the concept of Atlantis. And also I myself, I'm fascinated with the Western mystery tradition. And therefore, that's a huge area in which I would depart from Madame Blavatsky. I am not a fan of Eastern religions, Eastern yogas, or any of that concept pertaining, you see, to a lot of these Vedantic doctrines. I've studied them. I think they're fascinating, but I'm not particularly of that school. She was. So that's one area where, I would have very big differences with her. And there's many other ones as well, including the concepts of root races, and so forth and so on. But that's I have that difference with so many people. So I must say that first of all. But at the same time, I like her because she was a genius. She was a fantastic author who on several points had the most amazing things to say about things that are very, very important. And by the way, I don't know if you know this, but many of her critics, people who on the first reading of her works really disliked her, have actually gone on record to say that later on, as years went by, sometimes even as decades went by, and then they reread her works, they started to find out that many of the things that she was talking about, even some of the most obscure things, actually were coming to pass. So rather than being some sort of grandmother of the New Age movement, or sort of a patron of Masonry or devilish sort of cabals, this woman warned about these cabals all her life, and warned about the New Age movement, warned about the misuse of knowledge, esoteric knowledge, just as Rudolf Steiner did as well. And see, it's on a second and third reading of her works in a new context. So again, you have to also say, okay, who were her critics? A lot of them existed at her own time. In fact, her most vehement critics existed pretty much when she did. They were contemporaries, and therefore a lot of what they said is now rendered useless to us because time has moved on. We see her light more, we see what she was saying more, and their idiotic critiques hardly hold any water. In fact, the only one that probably still holds a little bit of water is the more academic critique that she didn't source her works as well as she might. And there's even rebuttals for that. I don't know if we have time to go into that as to why she did that. But that is actually one critique that you could say, yeah, okay, she was at fault there and should have sourced things more. And then we'd look into the reasons why she didn't do that, etc. But a lot of the other critiques of her have all been completely solved. And I believe, dismissed in many ways. And if anything, as time goes by, we start to see the really profound genius of people like her.
I agree. I mean, one thing that really stuck out to me was that we're all have the God spirit in us. We're all capable of this higher consciousness. And as a matter of fact, wasn't she the first person to really explain in depth about human spirituality?
Sure she did, but very much so. She was very interested in that. And these, of course, tie in with her metaphysical ideas, many of which I'm not a person who agrees with. But at the same time, sure, I like her for one specific thing, and that she had a very strong doctrine of the self. which reminds me very deeply of Ayn Rand. For instance, she has a quote that, if I may, I'd like to read.
Absolutely.
She says that the pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit. So she's absolutely saying that, look, just because she's a medium herself, or just because she's a so-called spiritualist, in quotation marks, and just because she deals with mysticism, she still has her feet on the ground and understands that, look, no gifts are going to come to your mind, no worthy gifts, unless you've earned them. It's up to you. It's about where you start from. It's the kind of person you are. It's the road that you choose to take and the pace that you walk on. That will be the most important thing when it comes to revelations of all kinds. So again, yes, she looked to the person. And of course, that immediately put her at loggerheads with all institutions. Because all institutions say, well, that doesn't really matter. You're kind of not really meant to focus on the kind of person you are. You just conform to our way. You just believe in our little gurus. You just read our little holy book. And most of those things will be ironed out. All those problematic differences of your psychology and your personality and your ups and downs and even your psychological anxieties, we'll take care of all of that, because we know that you're a wastrel. But now when you join our order, we'll take care of it all. So of course, that was one reason why I think the officialdom had such a problem with her. There was actually much deeper reasons why they had problems with her, and it's because of her statements about the Jews and their antiquity. Uh-huh. It was her statements about the absolute criminality of the Christian church, particularly the Vatican. These were in her great book, which I refer to a lot, which is Occult Doctrine, The Secret Doctrine, Volume 3, which is also sometimes called Occultism, that book. And one thing I must add, while we're on that subject, is that all her critics, this is every single one that I've been able to find, who critique her on various things, never mention those quotes, which I have throughout my works. I've repeated even those quotes. I have them in several slideshows, I have them on DVDs, and I've used the same quotes from that book in the Irish Origins of Civilization, and I think 2 or 3 turned up in the astrotheology book. So I've constantly referred to these quotes because I think they're that important, and it's one of the reasons, as I said, is I really like her for that. Then you turn around and say, well, this book was available. Researchers should have this book. These quotes are not like sort of invisible. They can be found. How come then, in the works of all her so-called critics, you never find this? And yet these are the same critics who then blame her about being a Rosicrucian, a Mason, being good friends with Giuseppe Mazzini, the head of the Illuminati, who's meant to have initiated her. And you'll even find terms like this in the work of David Icke, with no sourcing, with no references to when that event took place, or did it even happen, or where's your sources, you see? So this snowball effect, where even very great scholars and researchers can make this mistake just because they've happened to hear about it. And then you go deeper and you find that this is probably not even the case, and there's no sources about it. But then, as I said, coming back to what I was saying earlier, where are the quotes that show her openly critiquing the Jesuits? And then what do you make of critics who blame her of being a member of the Illuminati? This is just one area where they criticize her, when anybody who's done even like any deep type of research at all knows that there's not a hair's breadth difference between the Jesuit order and the Illuminati. In fact, when you really do your homework, as I've done, you know that they're one and the same. And I don't care if the Jesuits call themselves the Roman cult, which is in fact a term that they actually use. There's actually a phrase, a term known as the Order of the Roman Cult, which is nothing more than what the Jesuits are now. Whether they call themselves Propaganda Due, the Children of Loyola, I don't care what terms they give themselves. The Alan Dumbros or whatever, all the different Hydra heads that they've had, you see, how they've disguised themselves. When anybody knows that, look, the Illuminati was formed by the Jesuits, there's not a hair's breadth difference about them. How can then the person who should know that then claim that Madame Blavatsky was a member of the Illuminati when so many efforts she went into to point out the criminality of the Jesuits? You see, so again, there's a contradiction right there. So unfortunately, the people who come to a lot of this work for the first time, who don't know these pieces, who don't put these pieces together, will fall for those very shaky, theories. And that's why I spend a little bit more time going into Blavatsky, not because I'm a Blavatskyite or a theosophist. It's just I hate that kind of thing. And since my work is so full of references of other teachers and thinkers, I will spend the extra time to clear up the disinformation on Blavatsky, because I just will not tolerate it, because it's